The attack was spearheaded by volunteers, known as the Forlorn Hope. At 10 o'clock, they raced for the breach, but the French were ready for them. The breach itself was a rubble slope at about 45 degrees, littered with planks studded with sharp nails. At the top, there were dozens of these vicious things, timbers with sword blades. Behind them, there was a low wall lined with French infantry, and this whole area was swept by artillery fire.
More than 40 times the bugles rang out, and officers yelled the order to advance. Every one of the assaults was repulsed. Not a single Allied soldier got through alive.
Wellington was on a hill outside Badajoz, listening to reports which told him that attack after attack had failed. He remained outwardly calm, but his chief medical officer, Dr. James McGregor, could see by the flickering light that he'd turned pale and his jaw had dropped. Perhaps he was moved by the sheer scale of suffering so close at hand. Perhaps he wished he'd spent another day bombarding the defences. But I think that he knew that Britain would only accept losses on this scale for some result. Maybe the whole future of the campaign hung in the balance. He simply had to take Badajoz. He ordered Picton to try another assault at the castle. But it was a long shot.
The 3rd Division, led by Sir Thomas Picton, attacked the old Moorish castle that formed part of the town. Here there was no breach, and they had to climb scaling ladders. One officer described their rungs as being slippery with the blood and brains of brave men. But they kept trying. Somehow, against all the odds, this assault succeeded. It was as if sheer, indomitable willpower had lifted the soldiers over the walls. Once inside, an officer lowered the French flag and ran his own jacket up the flagpole, an unmistakable signal to his comrades at the breach that they were in. As Picton's men poured into the town, the French resistance collapsed. Badajoz had fallen. But the assault was not over yet. The surviving British troops who stormed into Badajoz went berserk. They rampaged through these streets, savagely attacking the Spanish inhabitants, raping women, even bayoneting children. A young officer recorded the horror.
Men, women and children were shot in the streets for no other apparent reason than pastime. Every species of outrage was publicly committed in the houses, churches and streets, and in a manner so brutal that a faithful recital would be too indecent to humanity.
Wellington's fury at the sack of Badajoz was matched by his grief when he saw the carnage at the breach. Perhaps 2,500 men had been killed or wounded here. Some were horribly burnt by mines, others dismembered by artillery fire, and others still struggling to emerge from beneath heaps of bodies of their friends. Wellington broke down and wept. When Picton arrived to congratulate him, Wellington was still distraught. He admitted, "I could not help crying. I bit my lip and did everything I could to stop myself, for I was ashamed he should see it, but I could not. And he so little entered into my feelings that he said, 'Good God, what is the matter?'"
Wellington's response to Badajoz was typical of his contradictory attitude to the ordinary soldiers who served under him. He was deeply moved by their bravery, and at the same time appalled by their savagery. Once he even referred to them as the scum of the earth. But these were the men he had to work with, and by mid-June, he was leading them into the heart of Spain, towards the ancient city of Salamanca and the most decisive battle of the entire war. Salamanca was occupied by a French army commanded by Marshal Marmont. When he heard of Wellington's approach, Marmont withdrew from the city and took up a position nearby. For days on end, the two armies hovered near each other, each watching and waiting for the other to make one false move. For a while it seemed that there might be no battle at Salamanca after all.
Early on the morning of the 22nd of July, the two armies were marching parallel, French on the left and Allies on the right, across this great plain dominated by two hills, Los Arapiles. Neither commander was prepared to offer battle without some sort of advantage.
From his position, Marshal Marmont could only see a limited number of Allied troops. He concluded that they were a rear guard, and that the bulk of Wellington's army was actually in retreat. In reality, Wellington was employing one of his most trusted tactics.
Fighting began here early that morning, when Wellington sent skirmishers to secure this hillock. He didn't want Marmont to see that, in fact, his whole army was just behind that ridge.
As the morning wore on, the dawn mist lifted and revealed the two hills in the plain. Marmont ordered a body of French skirmishers to make a dash for the bigger hill, the Greater Arapile. Wellington, who'd now moved to the other side of the plain, gave the same order. The French got there first. The British had to be content with the smaller hill. Contingents from the two armies now faced each other from the hills, while the rest of the troops took up positions on either side of the plain. British on the left, French on the right. Wellington was waiting for Marmont to make a mistake, but he wasn't relying on chance alone. Most of his army was still out of sight of Marmont, and out in front, tucked away behind a ridge, he positioned his leading division, commanded by Edward Pakenham. Ned Pakenham was one of Wellington's most trusted officers. He was also Kitty's brother, and hence Wellington's brother-in-law. Some said that Wellington's regard for Ned actually increased his affection for his wife. Now, as Ned took up his secret position, Wellington watched Marmont like a hawk.
Some of Wellington's staff had dismounted here in the village of Los Arapiles and were eating an early lunch. Wellington joined them briefly, alternating bites at a chicken leg with glances at the French through his telescope. He still hadn't decided to fight, but suddenly he saw that the French had got badly strung out on their line of march. He threw the chicken leg over his shoulder and shouted, "By God, that will do." He mounted and rode off for a better view. He was soon back, saying simply, "Marmont is lost." Then he rode off to Pakenham to initiate the attack.